If you've been sitting with your phone, waiting for a message that never comes, this video is going to explain exactly why that silence exists and what actually breaks it. Not tactics, not manipulation, the real psychological triggers that move inside an avoidant's mind, sometimes months after a breakup, and pull them back toward you. And I'll warn you now, trigger number 2 is one nobody talks about, because it happens entirely inside them, invisibly, long after you've stopped expecting it. So stay with me. Trigger 1. They realize you've actually moved on. Avoidants operate on a deeply unconscious assumption that you'll be there. Not because they're arrogant, but because their entire attachment system was built around emotional distance being safe. Researchers Mikulincer and Shaver found that dismissive avoidants rely on what they call deactivating strategies, suppressing attachment needs, maintaining independence, keeping connection at arm's length because closeness triggers an anxiety they've learned to suppress. What this means in practice: as long as they sense you're waiting, the distance feels manageable, comfortable even. But the moment they get a genuine signal that you've stopped waiting, not performed indifference, real movement, something breaks in that system. Their brain, which had filed you under available if needed, has to update that belief. And that update is uncomfortable in a way that often pushes them toward contact. Here's the important split, though. An avoidant who's doing real work on themselves will reach out because they recognize what they lost and want to try differently. An avoidant who isn't? They'll reach out to pull you back into the same dynamic. Because your absence threatened their control, not because they've changed. The behavior looks identical from the outside. The difference shows up in what they say and what they do after that first message. Trigger 2. The breakup finally hits them, just way later than it hit you. This one is the most misunderstood thing about avoidance, and it's the reason so many people give up right before the shift happens. Avoidants don't process loss in real time. Attachment research, including foundational work by Bowlby and later studies on adult attachment, consistently shows that dismissive avoidants suppress grief responses. Not consciously. Their nervous system has learned to route around emotional pain the way a highway reroutes around a blocked road. So while you were devastated in week 1, they seemed fine, maybe even relieved. That wasn't fake. It was their deactivation system doing what it always does. But feelings don't disappear. They get stored. And weeks or months later, often triggered by something completely unrelated, a song, a season changing, a moment of unexpected loneliness, the loss lands. Fully. Sometimes for the first time. That delayed grief is one of the most common reasons an avoidant reaches out long after a breakup when you've genuinely stopped expecting it. They're not reaching out because they've thought it through. They're reaching out because they're finally feeling it. If this is already clicking for you, drop a like. It tells me this content is hitting the right people. Trigger 3. They feel emotionally safe enough to come back. Avoidants don't avoid connection because they don't want it. They avoid it because intimacy triggers an anxiety their nervous system has learned to treat as a threat, engulfing, destabilizing, something to protect themselves from. Tatkin's work on attachment and the nervous system speaks directly to this. For avoidant-leaning individuals, emotional closeness can activate threat responses that feel physiological, not just emotional. It's not a choice they're making consciously. It's a pattern that runs much deeper than that. So the question isn't, does he miss me? It almost certainly is yes. The question is whether the environment feels safe enough to act on that. What creates that safety? Time. The absence of pressure. The last interaction being warm rather than explosive. If the way things ended left a door cracked open rather than slammed shut, that matters more than most people realize. This is where I want to ask you something. Think about the last conversation you had with your avoidant. Was it one they'd want to walk back toward, or one their nervous system would want to stay far away from? Tell me in the comments. There's no wrong answer, and it might help someone else reading to see themselves in your situation. Trigger 4. Loneliness hits, and everything reminds them of you. Here's what avoidants rarely admit, and what the research quietly confirms. They feel loneliness acutely. They're just extremely poor at recognizing it as loneliness in the moment. Diane Poole Heller's work on attachment styles describes how avoidants often experience relational need as a vague restlessness, a low-level dissatisfaction, rather than a clear emotional signal like, "I miss this specific person." Their emotional vocabulary for connection is genuinely underdeveloped, not as a character flaw, but as a result of deeply ingrained patterns that have built up over time. What breaks through that fog is sensory memory. A place you both went, a specific kind of light, a shared joke that surfaces randomly. These aren't small things, they're attachment anchors, and they bypass the avoidant's cognitive defenses entirely. When enough of those moments stack up, they become too loud to intellectualize away. That's when the, "Hey, I was just thinking about you" message gets drafted. Sometimes sent, sometimes deleted 17 times first. An avoidant who's grown will send it and actually be willing to have a real conversation. One who hasn't will send something vague enough to test your response without risking anything themselves. Trigger 5. Regret arrives, and so does your value. This is the trigger that takes the longest and cuts the deepest. When an avoidant left or withdrew, they had a story, consciously or not, about why the relationship wasn't working, why space was necessary, why they were right to pull back. That story protects them. It justifies the distance. But time is unsentimental. Without you in the picture, they start comparing. New connections feel shallower. The specific texture of what you had, the humor, the understanding, the history, becomes something they can't replicate by just finding someone new. Emotionally focused therapy, developed by Sue Johnson EdD, is built on the idea that what people grieve most in lost relationships isn't just the person, it's the felt sense of being known. Avoidants experience this too. It just arrives late, and it arrives quietly. Regret for an avoidant isn't dramatic. It's a slow accumulation of small moments where someone or something is slightly less than what you were. And eventually, that adds up into an impulse they can't explain rationally, to reach back toward you. Here's the reality check this video has been building toward. All 5 of these triggers are things that happen inside them. You cannot manufacture them. You cannot accelerate them. What you can control is whether you're still in a place of waiting when it happens, or whether you've built something real for yourself in the meantime. Because the cruelest possible outcome is that they finally come back ready, and you've spent every month since the breakup on pause. Healing isn't a strategy to get them back, but it is the only thing that protects you if they don't. If this gave you something real today, send it to someone who's been stuck in that silence, wondering what it means. It might be exactly what they need. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.